Okay. Hello friends. So today I'll be talking on this 31st COVID update. So it's a mix of a few topics. So I'll be talking about the global pandemic trends because I have a talk with a Japanese speaker so I had to create these trends. Following which I will talk about the healthcare workers affected so far with COVID and what is the risk. Then I will talk about COVID, post-COVID secondary infections and the co-infections, along with a bit of what is the new normal. So this is the data as of 12th October as to how our case fatality rate in India is doing. So if you look as of 12th October, 37 million odd people are affected globally, and our global case fatality rate stands at 2.86%. And in US, 7.76 million are affected, and their case fatality rate is 2.76. But if you look at India, which is you know advancing very close to US, and it may surpass US, it's 7.12. But surprisingly, you will see our case fatality rate is still very decent and is doing good. And this is the UK data. See, when you look at UK, Italy, and Germany in the subsequent columns, they were the ones who were first affected. So they took the brunt. So obviously, their mortality rate was much higher. So 6 lakhs people got affected in UK, and if you look at the case fatality rate as of 12th October, 7.07, which is very high actually. And if you look at Italy, 3 lakhs 54,000 got affected, and case fatality is the highest actually in Italy because Italy was the first country which took the brunt of COVID pandemic, and that is where it all started after Wuhan. Then the Germany, which was always praised to have a very low case fatality rate, so they had 3 lakhs 27,000. If you see, it is much more than India because Germany was always praised as a country with lowest case fatality rate at that point of time when the pandemic happened. But now, if you compare to our country, surprisingly, it seems to have done well. So we need to look at the possible reasons why this may have happened. And this is the Japanese data because I'm doing a talk with one of the Japanese speakers. So 89,000 were affected, and the case fatality is 1.81. So if we take all these figures at the face value, India seems to have done well, and we should be appreciative of all the efforts our nation is putting forward, our government is putting forward, our healthcare personnel are putting forward. So this is a point I want to draw home. And these are the case fatality rate trends of cities because I've compared the key cities, and you must be wondering why Hyderabad is missing because Hyderabad is not reporting at all of any of the case fatality, at least on the dashboard or in the web portal. So if you look at the Bangalore case fatality rate, as you see during 21st June, it was sitting at 5, and then it had a dramatic fall. I think this is the time when there was a huge bed crisis at that point of time, and only the government designated one nodal hospital was taking all the COVID cases, Bangalore Medical College. So then the decision was changed that all private hospitals have to start taking COVID cases. And then the private hospitals had to part half of their beds to the government. So that is when those are the possible assumed reasons that I can cite why the case fatality significantly came down from 5 to almost less than 2. And if you see this pattern distinctly, you don't see in any of the cities. So Ahmedabad case fatality started at 7, and if you see that curve is still lingering around 5. And if you look at Mumbai, it started at 5 and it is still lingering at around 4 point something. So Delhi started high, but Delhi has done well. It has come down to around 2 or 2 plus. So Karnataka, if you see it, once it came down, it continues to maintain at that level. And as I'm speaking on 12th October, it is 1.18, the case fatality, which is pretty low. And Chennai was touted as a place which was doing very well, which was much ahead of our Bangalore. But if you see, Chennai's case fatality rate has surpassed our Bangalore now. So, and Karnataka also, if you see, it has done reasonably well in keeping the case fatality rate. As I'm speaking, it is 1.4 at this point of time, the whole Karnataka case fatality rate. So, we should all be proud about the efforts put in by even our state in keeping the case fatality. And my strong belief is the Bangalore's case fatality rate in next few weeks will come down to less than 1. That has been the target or aim of our government and our healthcare workers here. And one must be wondering that, okay, Bangalore has good infrastructure. So I just wanted to see how it compares with only the districts of other states. And even when you compare with other districts, so Karnataka has done well. As you see, this is the case fatality rate of Maharashtra district, where I have excluded Mumbai and Pune. So if you see, it sits around 2.5, and this grey one is the Gujarat district, excluding Ahmedabad. You see, it is close to Karnataka CFR, maybe it is around 1.5, 1.6. So this is the Karnataka CFR, and Tamil Nadu CFR. If you see, it is little lower than Karnataka district CFR at this point of time. So this is the trends that have evolved over last 7 months from June to October. So it is very important that we keep looking at these numbers so that additional efforts could be proposed to all the administrative personnel who are dealing with COVID, along with our own healthcare worker peer groups, to see what all efforts collectively we need to put in place to keep the CFR down. So I'll just talk a couple of slides on the new normal. This is the part 2. Part 1, new normal, I had spoken. So just a few insights into the surgical practices. See, now because of COVID and intra-COVID, the whole surgical practice has changed. So the OPD practice of surgical specialties and inpatient has changed with regards to the way patients are managed and the flow of patients. The reason I say that is every patient who is planned for surgery are mandated to undergo certain COVID specific screening tests before they embark on the surgery. And every surgical patient has to be screened now, in addition to the previous screening of serology, which we were all doing, and the routine blood cell counts and other routine normal screening. In addition to that, the COVID screening is almost become mandatory, and triaging is also based on the screening tests that become available or pending screening tests that become available. And triaging in surgery for any elective also is elective or semi-elective is divided into emergency, semi-emergency, and elective. And there is a renewed emphasis on safety of healthcare workers in all the surgical specialties when they are dealing with any of these patients. And throughout the care of these patients, there is a continuous flow of information to that effect on emphasizing the screening, triaging, and safety of healthcare workers. And there is an ongoing communication happening between the healthcare personnel, between the patient, between the family, and between all the other operation theatre personnel who are dealing with this situation. And there is a constant evolution of educational process in trying to look into the protocols that are being adopted in caring for these patients in OT, be it in OT, be it during surgery, or be it in post-operative setting. So this is a new normal that has happened. And as I said, the diagnostic tests that are being done as a pre-surgical diagnostic, the routine ones are happening. In addition to that, COVID-specific tests are mandatory now. And these tests can vary from PCR or antibody test if someone has had a COVID before to check whether they are suitably immunized, and rapid antigen based on the emergent nature of the surgery. And when these tests are pending or not conclusive, then obviously the next test that we would subject to is even CT scan and imaging to see if there is an indirect corroborative evidence of COVID that may be present in the patient. And the whole operative, pre-operative, intraoperative, and post-operative policies have been sort of tweaked and changed to adapt to this new change. And this is the sort of algorithms that surgical teams have been adopting to and in sort of stratifying the patients and triaging them, and then prioritizing the need for the surgery in the high risk cases. So then this nice little review article, not review, so this is a perspective which came in New England Journal, which I thought I should talk about this. It's just a one-page sort of a perspective that came called New Order, New Hope from the UK authors. So this is a picture that you would recall. So this is a Matsya avatar in Dashavatar. For all Hindus, you would have read about this. So this is the first avatar of Vishnu. So when the world was coming to an end, select people were taken and passed on to the next yug. So there were different yugs. So they were moved to the next yug to continue with their life and progeny and procreation. So this is the preamble, the author's talk, or Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark also is a similar concept where select living beings are taken into the ship and moved to the next generation. So this is a sort of a mystical sort of a thought process. So the authors start off with this narrative saying if COVID were to do this to the current generation, and if you have a choice of picking up five specialities amongst the doctor fraternity, what would that be? So the authors say in this pandemic, the five most sought after specialty doctors that would be picked up are intensivists, would be ER physicians, would be pulmonologists, would be internists, and family physicians. Because this is the group of people which would be heavily relied upon to save the generation during COVID. So this is what authors narrate in this article, and these five group of doctors become the headline actors. There is anesthesiologists also mentioned along with intensivists and anesthesiologists. So what the authors are trying to elucidate in this is, so they are mentioning that this is a huge opportunity amidst the prevailing risks, and this picture depicts that very well. There are a lot of risks associated when we're dealing with this COVID, but these specialties should look at this as opportunity to leverage themselves on to measure and reflect their utility in this sort of a situation and recognize their value contribution during this situation. This is what authors emphasize in this paper. And following the pandemic, the authors foresee the specialties which will be more in demand will be obstetrics and pediatrics because of a lot of procreation that possibly would happen, and all the kids who will come out of their shelter and they start getting affected. So I think this is what authors are foreseeing. And authors do recognize that epidemiologists and virologists who are always on the background have now come into the limelight. So they are in a sort of an uncomfortable media attention at this point of time to get their viewpoints on this whole pandemic. Otherwise, we would have possibly never heard of epidemiologists making news headlines in any of the healthcare situation. And what authors interestingly mention is the surgical teams who always appeared or perceived to be at the helm of any healthcare organization and who appear to command lot of authority, they have had an undignified fall from favor. So these are the words that authors have used, and they say the surgical specialties have taken backseat because of this whole pandemic. And they use a sort of an offensive word in this NEJM. They say surgeons have become from omnipotent to impotent. These are the exact words that is written in the article. So because the surgeons had this sort of an omnipotent sort of a feeling in any sort of a healthcare organization, so that definitely has taken a beating, is what authors try to allude to in this particular paper. So now with regards to economic effects, as you see, so this is the economic curve of India, the GDP from 2000, and you see it has taken a huge dip in 2020, and the presumption is, the anticipation is that it would recover in early 2021, and then it would again sort of a decay and then plateau. So this is the prediction that financial pundits have made of the GDP in the COVID-19. Okay, so now we'll move on to this particular paper, because see, now all the literature, if you scout through, they're all talking about post-COVID issues and other COVID-related healthcare issues, because COVID has really redefined our understanding of medicine, because it is really affecting every dimension of the healthcare in an individual. So it is interesting because we need to see in the post-COVID, after they have recovered from COVID, are they being affected with secondary infection? So this is a good article that came from Canadian group. It came, I think, during August 2020. The title is Bacterial Co-infection and Secondary Infection in Patients with COVID-19, a Leaving Rapid Review and Meta-analysis. So it's a meta-analysis of a lot of studies they have taken, predominantly Chinese studies, to see what are all the co-infections that tend to happen. So the studies that were picked up was from 2019, late 2019 to 16th April 2020. They have taken 24 studies which have looked into co-infection or secondary infection in COVID, and they have taken 3,338 patients who were looked, COVID patients who were looked for presence of any secondary infection. So they found the co-infection. Co-infection means when someone comes with COVID, in addition to COVID, they have had other infection. It could be influenza, or it could be other bacterial infection, it could be other community acquired. 3.5% had a co-infection. And secondary infection, which means that after they have recovered, their course is complicated by another infection within the hospital. The secondary infection was in 14.3% of the patients had secondary infection. And when someone is critically ill, the risk of this secondary infection goes up to 71.9. So which means it is interesting to look into our ICU population and see whether this figure is what we witness in our patients. That's up to 72% can tend to have secondary infections, and this was more in mechanically ventilated patients. So this is the forest plot. As you see the last one, so this is the percentage of bacterial infections. It is 3.5 here, and that was obviously statistically significant. So this is just a study to say these are the sort of infections that you could anticipate in COVID, but when they're critically ill, the risk of secondary infection is more. So this was another study which came in August 2020 by the Chinese authors. So it looks into risks and features of secondary infection in severe and critically ill COVID patients. Here it was a small study, 38 patients they took, and they looked at secondary infection. It was 57.89% was the secondary infection in this Chinese group, and this infection was much higher in intubated and mechanically ventilated patients. And among secondary infection, respiratory secondary infections was most common, 55.28, followed by bloodstream infections. I think we are seeing this sort of a pattern even in our practice. We are seeing bloodstream infection in post-COVID, isn't it? They are going some coagulous, some staph or burkholderia. We are seeing all sorts of exotic infections. So it's 34.21, and the third was UTI. 18.4% had UTI, and amongst the secondary infections, GNB constituted 50% of the cases, and GPC was present in 26.92, and fungi was present in 7.69. So in fact, we've had a COVID patient who was referred from another hospital with a cavity who is known aspergillus. So we are also seeing this sort of a pattern. So it is important for us to be sensitized to the type of infection these patients are prone to develop, because they go into sort of immune paralysis. You would have used steroids, and in some cases tocilizumab may have been used. So all this makes them vulnerable to get this sort of a secondary infection. And this is the graphical representation of respiratory, bloodstream, and urinary. And if you look into this manuscript, they have listed all the types of organisms amongst GNB, GPC, and fungi that these patients have grown. So it is interesting for us in India to look into our own pattern. What is the risk of infection in COVID in our own setting, and what are the type of bugs that are growing? So that will be a good research question for all of us. And this is the curves that they have depicted in this manuscript about the frequency of discharge. If you look at the dark green, is the discharges, the more discharges that happened where there was no secondary infection, and this pale blue one is where secondary infection, where there was a less sort of a frequency of discharges that was happening. So okay, so we'll just move on. So that's just a little tidbit about the infection. So now we'll move to the sad bit, which is the deaths in healthcare workers. So as of 12th October 2012 data, so these are the deaths of healthcare workers that has happened worldwide. If you see, the maximum deaths has happened in Mexico, 1,320 deaths, and in USA, 1,077. So our India is in sort of a seventh place, where 573 healthcare workers have died until now, and followed by, so if you see, UK stands in the third position of around 649, and Brazil 634, Russia 631. So this is the sort of a healthcare worker deaths that have happened, and these are the countries which top the list, the last one being Indonesia. So Mexico leads, USA, Russia, Brazil, UK, India. So they come in that order. So it is important for all the Indian healthcare workers to be aware of this data and be cognizant of all the precautions that one should take to prevent this. And when you look into the data specific to India, so this is the paper which came from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, COVID-19 and mortality in doctors. So they have given distribution of specialty-wise mortality amongst doctors. If you see, the general practitioners remain the highest, followed by emergency medicine, dentist and chest medicine, general surgery 6, ENT, so on and so forth. And if you see, surgical specialties are little less later down the order. So this is interesting data to see that doctors are becoming very vulnerable, and the question one should ask is whether healthcare workers are at a higher risk of dying. So that is a question, and that question, it is answered by this sort of a data that came in one of the paper, where if you see, amongst the non-doctor, the death rate was 0.3%, but when you look at the death rate in doctors, it was 15.3%, which is very worrying. So which means to say, this paper elucidates the point that the death risk is much higher in doctors than in the general population. And this, in fact, made a newspaper sort of a headline. As of 10 September 2174 doctors with the screened, I think 382 had died. These were the infected doctors, and 16.7 was the case fatality rate. And when you compare with the general population, where we know on 10 September, general population case fatality was 1.7%, amongst the doctor community it was 16.7%. And in this percentage, when they removed all the interns, residents, and the youngsters, then the case fatality in practicing elder doctors went up to 36.4%. So this raises an important question that healthcare personnel and doctors should take extraordinary precautions to their best ability to see how best they can take these preventative measures in avoiding infection, and even if they've got infection, to seek early sort of a consult and get treated appropriately. So the conclusions of this new normal is the new normal should not be left as a matter of fate. It depends on the choices that we make. And the new normal has put science and facts at the highest pedestal to determine the resources that needs to be mobilized in tackling this pandemic. And science and fact is something that would influence the behavior of the society in general. And the new normal has put in renewed emphasis on the solidarity amongst the personnel who are the front line of caring for global pandemic. And it has put emphasis on increased compassion and empathy for the patients who are getting affected. And this new normal has underemphasized the materialistic pursuits and the trade aspect of the whole world in general, and has put a break to this whole materialistic pursuits. And that, in effect, possibly would have reduced the stress with regards to the materialistic pursuit that the stress was building up in the society. And so obviously it has reduced the carbon footprint, and earth has become a better celestial body is what they mentioned. And the whole world in general has taken a break from obsessive focus and near term gratification, and world is putting more emphasis to prepare itself better for such imminent threats in the future. And it has put emphasis on fair and compassionate redistribution of wealth, which has also become very important because there are a lot of people who are affected, especially the marginalized sections of society where they need help. So that looks at redistribution, and that we have seen in India, where government is putting emphasis on taking care of these migrant workers and other societies in general who are deprived of any revenue generation. And it has put emphasis on security and opportunity to all. So I would end my talk with this nice little quote that came. I'm still wondering why we can't make medicine for a virus which can be killed by sanitizer or soap. Thank you very much.